Sir, is everything fine? Sir?
Yeah, okay. Okay, okay. Hello, friends. We are with the live interactive session for this course, Literature and Life. We call it a pragmatic approach. Let's see the outline now. We will look at these topics in our presentation now. We will try to understand what literature is, then try to understand what life is. Thereafter, discuss the pragmatic approach that we have adopted in this course. Pragmatic means practical, and what we specifically mean is what kind of impact literature can have on human beings. To understand the pragmatic approach, we will use a famous critic's concept called four coordinates of literature. The critic is M.H. Abrams. When we look at that particular slide, you will understand where the pragmatic approach is situated in literary studies and why and how we are using that particular coordinate to understand the pragmatic approach to literature. You may be aware that we have used quotations for every lecture that we have used. One or two quotations we have used to understand life and literature. We will recall some of them and connect with the entire course. When we put them together, you can understand the significance of using quotations for understanding the key aspects of life. Then we will look at three dimensions of our course. One is called human relationships, another is called reflections on life, and the third is called takeaways. These three dimensions of our course actually have a bearing on the pragmatic approach that we have adopted. What can literature do for us? What can we do with literature? And how does literature work for human beings? These are the major questions that we can address in these three topics. We will refer to as many texts as possible and discuss these questions so that we can really understand what literature can do for us or how literature can work for human beings. In order to address the learner's uh, need for answering a question, particularly the last questions in the last section, where we have some descriptive answers. You have to analyze a poem or a prose piece or an extract from a drama or novel. So to attempt that question in a descriptive form, we have a sample poem for you and we have a sample analysis as well. If you want to have one exclusive session on this descriptive answer, we may meet once again. That depends on your request and your need. If you need it, certainly we will do that for you. Now, let's begin with understanding literature. We have given some definitions in our previous lecture and in our entire course, we have touched upon this. Here, for the sake of recalling, to get a context, we are giving a different perspective. We can have a brief understanding of literature as follows. Literature is a creative and imaginative work of art through the verbal medium, that is language. We may have a prose piece or a poem or a drama or a novel or a short story. And today we consider film also as part of literary studies. So I have brought in film as well. The literary piece that we consider may be realistic, where we will have an emphasis on the society. That means we have a sociological perspective. The writer may focus on the social relations among people. Then literature may be naturalistic. Here, what we mean by naturalistic is the writer focuses on the environment and its impact on individuals, particularly with reference to certain uncontrollable emotions in human beings. That's why we call it biological, certain involuntary uh, emotions that we have, certain urges, strong emotions like love or hatred, revenge, and all that we can appreciate through a naturalistic mode adopted by writers. And similarly, we can call literature expressionistic as well. We call it psychological because what happens in the mind of the reader is brought to the what happens in the mind of the character is brought to the reader through by the writer. So sociological, that is realistic. What happens in the society to an individual, that is realistic novel. What happens to an individual with regard to the environment and the biological urges in that individual, that is naturalistic. And uh, expressionistic, what happens to the individual in the mind of that individual, in his dreams and fantasies or her fantasies, and all that we can understand through the psychological medium. So there are broadly three such modes of writing. We have some examples for each of them in our course. In general, we can say that literature does not refer to the world or anything else. It refers to itself. That is where we have this idea of literature being self-reflexive. We will have more of this in our postmodernist literature. We haven't considered any piece of postmodern literature because there you will not have much reference to the world or to the human beings. Some uses of literature and all that is difficult to identify. Sometimes literature may be playful. The word ludic here means playful. Just for the sake of playing with words, playing with ideas, some writers may attempt. And another thing is literature may be ethical. This is what we have in our old literature in all countries. Initially, most of the literary pieces were aimed at helping individuals to live their life peacefully in an ethical manner. Now, we also have another dimension of literature, that is, literature can deal with the local issues or it can attempt to deal with larger universal or global issues. So in some cases, we will find that the best of literature is both local and also global. So using some recent term like local, we can say that literature is local as well today. Now, to understand literature in another way, we can say literature deals with human beings in their multifaceted relationships, complicated, complex relationships with other human beings and the world in general, and also sometimes the relationship within oneself, the self and oneself, the body and the self. There itself, we may have many problems. So all these various aspects of human beings are brought into literature by the writer through language for us, the reader, to find our own way in life. Let's see what life is all about. For life to exist, we need a body. So the material life and the ideal life or spiritual life both go together. When we look at the body or the material life, we can say that it is the mundane life where we are interested in our own self. We want to help ourselves. And because of the neglect of others or the surroundings, we may be ignorant, or sometimes we may take some foolish actions. And because of our ignorant um, approach to life, we may be poor in many ways, not necessarily in terms of money, not necessarily in terms of social advantages, but in terms of understanding the richness of life, where we may be poor, and as a result, we may have a life which is really absurd, that is meaningless. We find this more in 20th century literature, because when man is so selfish, when he doesn't think about the surroundings, then how can he or she find meaning in life? On the other hand, when we look at this ideal life, focusing on the mind, focusing on something called spirit or spiritual life, we don't think only about ourselves, we think about the rest of the world, even the cosmos. That's where we have something called a selfless life. Here, we understand that we have to serve something beyond our own body or beyond our own mind. There are many people in the world who are service oriented, and such people will be self-aware. Our body, our life is very limited. We can be a little more aware of this limited passage of time for every individual, and be wise to spend this life meaningfully. And that's where you can say that even a poor person can live a rich and meaningful life. In this context, we have this quotation from Leo Tolstoy. Tolstoy is a great writer from Russia, and he is a revered, respected writer all over the world. And he has such a beautiful sentence here: the sole meaning of life is to serve humanity. Many may not agree with this statement from Leo Tolstoy, but most great leaders, most great thinkers, most people who have stood the test of time, those who are still remembered today, many of them have left a legacy of service to humanity. Now let's come to a pragmatic approach. This is a practical and sensible approach to consider literature in terms of what it can do for us, how literature can work for us. Can it show us some way to live our life? You can ask such questions. Can it help us to live our life in some meaningful ways? We can ask a few more questions like, what can we do with literature? We can read literature and find pleasure and also profit. Pleasure just for the sake of spending time, we can read and enjoy. At the same time, we can also find some profit in terms of ethical dimensions, in terms of some guidance for living our life, understanding the complexities of life. There, it can do something for us. And more importantly, what every individual can do with literature. We can engage with literature. We can find pleasure in literature. We can find some profit with literature. Can we do something more than that? That is where we have some people who spend their lifetime for reading and discussing literature throughout their life, writing about literature. It's not that they create literature, they write about literature, criticism and all that. both critics and creative writers spend their whole lifetime to read literature, to write literature, to discuss literature, to write about literature and all that. They spend a lot of time. If we remember Dr. Johnson today, Dr. Samuel Johnson today, we have to understand that he wrote poems, he made a dictionary, he also wrote a novel, he wrote many character sketches. Most importantly, he started one biographical approach to literature called, using the author's life to interpret, to understand the writings of the author. So we have a great book called Lives of Poets. So some people, he can never be forgotten in literature, in not only in British literature, any literature in the world. He is a model writer and model critic, model reader, you can say. Um, to answer these questions, we can say that literature is a means to live our life well, though sometimes it may not exactly be a treatise like an essay on man. Essay on man is a poem or a book of poetry by Alexander Pope. But then you will find that every book need not be, every writing need not be like that. Every writing need not have some explicit moral guidelines, but through the story we can understand many ideas which we can use for our life. Therefore, we can say that literature is a guide to the art and science of life. We can find both art and science. There are many ways in which many principles which are embedded in, for example, in the plays of Shakespeare. Anyone who reads any play by Shakespeare will find certain codes of conduct for life which are not written down as codes, but you can actually derive the codes from the plays of Shakespeare. For example, Julius Caesar, how a king ought to be a leader for their people. We can learn from the drama. It is also an art because it's not exactly defined. Science defines exactly, whereas art does not define exactly. So both implicit and explicit understanding or description of life we can find in literature. We need to, therefore, to understand language, literature, the human life, and the world at large through the study of literature and life. Now we come to our topic. Now we come to our topic, M.H. Abrams' four coordinates. We have four coordinates. You can see from the picture: universe, work, artist, and audience. Universe refers to the world. Work refers to the text, the poem or drama or novel or anything that we deal with. And the artist is the author who has written the novel or drama or poem. And the last point is audience. That's where the readers come into picture. A writer writes about the world in a dramatic form or in a poetic form for the reader. That is the audience. So all these three, artist, universe, and work, reach the audience. So you can see the universe is reflected in, the world is reflected in the work of art, and which refers to itself. It may have some reference to the world, and it may not have reference to the world outside reality, it may not have. But then generally in the postmodern context we find that the literary piece refers to itself. When we come to the artist, you can see that the artist may have some autobiographical element, or not necessarily. He may deal with some other life. It can be both creative, highly imaginative, not necessarily anything to do with his own or her own life. But whatever they may do, whether they reflect the world, whether they write about themselves or write about something else, where in a work of art, in a text, we can understand that there is some kind of meaning, purpose for the audience. Whether there is any purpose or not, that itself is a philosophical question, but we take a pragmatic approach. That means our understanding is there is some use in reading literature. Such concepts are discussed in one essay called Orientation of Critical Theories by M.H. Abrams. It's a beautiful essay. If anyone can get it, if you read it, you will understand much more the whole history of literary criticism, the ways in which literature can be approached. You can understand from this. These are the course modules. We have 12 weeks program, and we have week 1 uh, with introduction, week 2 with elements of literature. Each module you can understand we have had 4 lectures, and then when we come to the uh, weeks where we have highlighted in red color, you can see we are discussing individual literary pieces. In the introduction or elements of literature, or even in the discussion, we are not discussing individual literary pieces. We may combine many literary pieces and discuss them as examples. But when it comes to prose 1, prose 2, in week 3 and 4, we discuss individual texts of authors, 4 texts in prose 1, 4 texts in prose 2. Similarly, we have 4 texts in poetry 1 and 4 texts in poetry 2. And when we come to drama, we have only 1 text, but we have 5 lectures. And in one act plays, we have 2 one act plays, but each play has 2 lectures. That means 4 lectures we have here. Next, we have a novel, only 1 text we have, but we have 5 lectures. And when we come to short story, you can see that we have 2 groups of short stories, one mostly from other countries, and the second group having largely stories from India, except one. In short stories also, we have 4 texts each. So totally, you will find that we have some 50 lectures or videos, and in these 50 videos, we have 28 texts and 38 lectures and 4 discussions. We also cover Indian literature, American literature, and British literature. Largely, we cover specimens or samples from these 3 literary contexts. Now, in my understanding of literature and life, I found that love is very predominant. Love is not necessarily between a man and a woman. Love for humanity, love for nature, love for God, love for birds and animals. You can extend it to anything. So, in addition to this love, there is also a sense of loneliness in human beings. That is something very strange. You will find this more in 21st century literature or late 20th century literature. Man is thrown into the world alone. He doesn't have anybody to share his thoughts and ideas. He is separated from fellow human beings. He is separated from God or universe or nature. And in this context, we must understand that how do we live our life? We can live our life only through a happy-go-lucky attitude with a sense of laughter. That's where comedy is very important. We have a one-act play, which is a comedy. That is Chekhov's play The Bear. If you read it, you'll understand the meaning of laughter, comedy, and how we live our life through a comic approach to life. We also have a tragedy, but then the tragedy also includes a lot of comic moments in the play. Now let's see some of these quotations from great writers that we have brought into our course. They focus on certain different dimensions of life, but many of them you'll find that they have something to do with loneliness, love, laughter, life. According to R.K. Narayan, a profound and mitigated loneliness is the truth of life. Anyone, anywhere, you will find we may live in a family, we may work in an office, we may live in a community, but at the bottom of it all, there is a sense of loneliness which is oppressive for the writer and oppressive for all human beings. I'm not sure if animals have such a feeling, but we do have such feeling of being away from alone, away from others, being alone in this world. John Didion, for example, says we tell stories in order to live. Why do we tell stories? Why are we doing a course like this? We can say we do this course to live our life, in order to live. We tell stories, listen to stories, we write stories, discuss stories to live our life. This is one way of living our life. It doesn't mean that we are not focusing on our quotidian way of life, ordinary way of life. We have to pay attention to drink water or feed our body, wash our clothes, so do so many other things. In spite of all this, we also have to tell stories to live our life. Look at any culture, you will find that lots of stories are there. That's how people have lived their life and spent their life. When we move to Virginia Woolf, we find a very interesting quotation: books are the mirrors of life, mirrors of the soul. They literary pieces, particularly literature, mirrors the soul of human beings, male or female, child or adult, man in the past or in the present, imaginary character and all that. Everywhere you have some interesting, um, you have some very interesting aspects of our individual humanity. We also have some quotations from many other writers like H.W. Longfellow. Uh, he says, if we could read the secret history of our enemies, we should find in each man's life sorrow and suffering enough to disarm all hostility. Remember, we all of us go through this river of sorrow. Nobody can escape this river of sorrow and suffering. Why not we help each other? That is a question. And W.H. Davis says, as long as I love beauty, I am young. And we have to love beauty or some sense of aesthetic life we must live. Appreciate beauty, appreciate some goodness in life, appreciate some sense of order in life. Then we have Robert Frost, who says, if we couldn't laugh, we would all go insane. Remember, madness is part of our life. Many of us, every day, every moment, now and then, we get into and come out of this madness. We look normal, but most of the times you'll find that we are abnormal as well. So to keep ourselves away from this abnormality or insanity, we have to laugh. Emily Dickinson says, if I can stop one heart from breaking, I shall not live in vain. So you can understand that helping others, helping someone to live their life peacefully, happily, is something that all of us have to pay attention to. Okay. Next comes Louis Glick, a writer who won the Nobel Prize recently. Intense love always leads to mourning. Where there is love, there is pain actually. There is some kind of separation. There is a sense of loss. There is a sense of grief. We cannot escape. Whoever is born as a human being cannot escape this love. Love in family, love in society, or whatever it is, wherever it is. We may love our organization, but then one day we will find that we are thrown out of that organization. A good example in this context is Steve Jobs. He grew up, he actually developed the company Apple, but then the board of directors threw him out. So intense love for one organization can lead to so much of pain in one's life. It can be in human relationships between a man and a woman, between a father and a son, between a mother and a daughter, or between parents and children. In all relationships, in between people who are in friendship, it can happen everywhere. This is life. We have to be prepared for it. When there is some separation, we must accept it gracefully. Then we come to Anton Chekhov. We learn about life not from pluses alone, but from minuses as well. Remember, life is both positive and negative. We cannot live only in positive way. We cannot live only in negative way. But then we have to maintain some kind of balance between the positive and negative aspects of life. We have to first of all understand which is positive and which is negative. And if we find something positive, we have to increase it as much as we can. Then we come to James Singh, an author whose one act play Riders to the Sea we have taken up for our course. No man at all can be living forever, and we must be satisfied. Remember, one day we have to leave this world. We have to accept death. Then comes Arvind Adiga. It is one of the beautiful quotations. It is not his own writing. He has quoted it from one Persian poet in his novel, The White Tiger. I was looking for the key for years, but the door was always open. We are all, in one sense, blind people. The door is open, but we are looking for some keys to open the door. That's how we live our life. Next comes Guy de Maupassant. We have a story, The Dispenser of Holy Water by Maupassant. There is only one good thing in life, and that is love. Here you can understand the fundamental aspect of life. Love is the basis on which love is the axis of life. We live with this life, we live our life with love or through love. Next comes the German writer Heinrich Boll. He says, if the dead could speak, there would be no more war. We indulge in so many wars. We initiate wars. We go to wars with another country or battles with another country or groups of people. But if the dead people could come back and tell us their sufferings and sorrows, we would not really go for war again. But they cannot come back. So we will not stop indulging in war anywhere, anytime. We will continue to suffer like our predecessors, our forefathers suffered. Next comes the Brazilian writer Joao Gumare Rosa. This is something very interesting for me as an individual, and I'm sure all of you will also like it. The master is not the one who teaches, it is the one who suddenly learns. We learn something suddenly from life through so many encounters in our life, by reading or by living our life. When we read a book, suddenly we will learn something. When we live our life, when we encounter so many incidents in our life with people, with nature or anywhere, we will also learn something suddenly. Jnanodayam or enlightenment comes to us suddenly, then that person becomes a master. The Buddha or people like Buddha. Now, we have seen all different quotations from various writers to point to various dimensions of literature and life. Now, we move on to uh, one of the most important aspects of our course. How does literature deal with human relationships in life? We have many texts, as we saw, and in the case of Kalam's essay, When I Failed, we have the relationship between a student and a teacher, or two teachers actually. One is a Professor Srinivasan is an academic teacher, a professor, whereas Swami Sivananda is a spiritual guru. But the same student, when he meets in two different contexts, you can understand the different kinds of learning. Academic learning is one thing, but spiritual learning is another. So learning about life does not happen in the classroom alone. It also happens outside the classroom in an ashram, or when one is depressed and one meets somebody like a saint or so, we learn so many things. And in both cases, you find that the teachers guide Kalam to accept his own life. Kalam had to work harder to cross the hurdles of life. And Kalam says, accept your destiny. We will see that as part of our takeaways when we come to the third dimension of our course. This is the first dimension. Human relationships is the first dimension. Second is reflections on life. And the third is um, takeaways. When we look at Chetan Bhagat's essay, My Stupid Suicide Plan, we can see that children or young boys and neighbors, how they relate to each other. And particularly when a student who is preparing for their public examination, hoping to get some good marks in JEE, that entrance examination for admission to engineering programs in IITs, how does that student learn about life? When he doesn't get enough score, he feels depressed, he wants to commit suicide, but the aunt neighborhood in the neighborhood tells him taking poison will cause so much pain, and that's how she prevents him from committing suicide. And also the boy has an opportunity to look at a dog which fights with other dogs to get its food for the day, food for just for that moment. After that, after getting the food, The dog doesn't bother about anything else. So the life is given to us freely, and we are not given any switch off button to switch off our life. When we are not provided with a switch off button to kill our life, why should we do that? Power off button, he says. Power off button. Why should we kill ourselves? That's how he asks. So the relationship between the child and the neighborhood auntie, and also the relationship between a human being and an animal like dog, that becomes the center of interaction in this prose piece. Then we have Amish, why I write, and we have the relationship in this case between an author and his wife and his family members and also the publisher. An individual may work in a company and may be willing to write a novel or a story, but then if he or she doesn't get support from the family, it may not be possible. And he may also complete writing the manuscript, getting the manuscript ready, but when he is not able to find a suitable publisher, how does one publish his writing? So there is a good relationship between the publisher, I mean the agent, actually literary agent, with whom Amish has a good relationship, and then they become a partner. They partner with each other to print and distribute and sell the first book. That is how Amish becomes one of the greatest novelists of our contemporary world. Next, we see the American writer Joan Didion. There, we also have the same title, Why I Write. And she says, writing is all about human relationships. When you have a man and woman, or two men, or two characters, or even one single character, that character is related to the environment or to another person, there is a cause and effect relationship. There is an impact. There is a kind of interaction between the two. Without this interaction, there is no writing. And she says writing is an aggressive act. You may also understand in human relationships there is a sense of aggression. You can't believe it. Father and mother, father and son may have aggressive relationship with each other. Next, we have Virginia Woolf. She writes about the death of the moth, and she tells us about her own observation of the moth, how the moth dies in her room. And next we have Wordsworth in his poem Resolution and Independence. We have a desperate poet, a young poet who thinks about the loss of his friends. Human beings have to die one day, but why he's asking, why do young people die? And he doesn't have an answer. He is worried. And then when he meets an old man in the moor in a lonely place, and he learns about the hard work, optimism of the old man, and then learns to get his spirit back. Then we have Longfellow. We have two people here in this poem, A Sum of Life, the young man and the psalmist. Psalmist tells something, but the young man replies, life is not but an empty dream. So we have a series of answers to the psalmist. We have to think about life seriously, do something for our life, be a hero, get into action, leave something to the world, leave something in the on the sands of time. Next comes a beautiful poet with a beautiful poem, W.H. Davis. He was a poor fellow. That is a different story. He was a tramp actually. William Henry Davis comes with this poem, Leisure, where he says human beings have to be always connected with nature. If you are not connected with nature, if you don't appreciate the beauty of nature in the flowers, in the animals, and the squirrels, in the dance of a woman and all that, we will not have a wonderful life. What is this life? You're full of care. We don't have time to stand and stare. That's how he tells us in that poem, Leisure. We need to relax and enjoy this life, appreciate life, be happy to see a flower or a butterfly or anything like that, and forget about ourselves. That's the whole idea. When we look at nature, what happens to us? We are attracted to a flower, a tree, or an animal, or even water or a mountain, and then we lose ourselves in that moment of being connected with the rest of the world. That forgetfulness, we must forget ourselves. We must get out of our own self and go to something else apart from our own self. That is the best form of relaxation for us. Next, we have Robert Frost. We have a relationship between the poet and the neighbor. There is, of course, a friendly relationship. They don't quarrel with each other, but they have differences of opinion. You can understand from the story, just because you have a neighbor and another person there in the same place, it doesn't mean that they have cordial relationship all the time. They may have differences of opinion, how they negotiate, how they relate to each other, how they get along with each other. In spite of the fact that they don't agree with each other, they keep going. That is necessary. You can't just leave the place. You have to coexist with another human being. One country has to coexist with another country. We may have problems. We may have all kinds of complexities. Still, we have to live together along with each other. We cannot just simply wipe out another country or destroy another country and live alone. And similarly, one person cannot destroy another person and live alone. We have to live in coexistence. The whole idea is brought to us through the poem Mending Wall. And let's see some more human relationships now. We have Dickinson's poem, A Narrow Fellow in the Grass, where we have the relationship between the poet and the natural world, where that natural world is represented by a snake, which causes some shudder in the body of the poet. But then the poet learns to understand that it looks like a rod, but then it turns out to be a snake. Through the story, we understand the relationship between appearance and reality. Next, we have Kamala Das. We live in the language. That's the whole idea of this poem. Language and human beings. How we relate, how human beings are connected with language. The language with its words and all that grow like branches from the head of the poet. So it happens to all of us as well. We can understand that linguistic dimension of our physical body and psychological mind through this poem on words by Kamala Das. Then we have Louis Glick, who talks about the relationship between the teacher and the student in the classroom, inside the classroom. When teachers teach, I am teaching you and you are learning from me. We are in the virtual classroom. You can see that the teacher tells lies in the classroom in so many ways. I tell you the probably partly within quotes. I tell you the lie within quotes that literature helps us to live our life. So that's how teachers tell so many things. In this case, Louis Glick tells the story of the myth of Sisyphus. And when the students ask her questions, she is unable to answer. And then she says she accepts her fault and reflects on the relationship between students and teachers in the classroom. Next, we have Sujata Bhatt, who is a diasporic writer. She struggles hard with the mother tongue, which is hidden in her mouth, and then that eruption of that mother tongue in her mind or in her mouth. That's what she speaks about. Earlier, in the case of Sujata Bhatt, we saw the relationship between a language and the self, and here the language in particular is the mother tongue. When you go to another country, can you suppress your mother tongue? That's the whole idea. We can't, Sujata Bhatt says. Next, we come to Grish Karnad and his play Tuklak, the relationship between the king and his subjects, including the king and his close friends like Najib and Barani, or even the stepmother. How all these relationships are destroyed by the whimsical ideas or attitudes of the king. Next, we have Anton Chekhov's play The Bear, where we have a dead husband, Nikolai, and a widowed lady, wife called Popova. And she thinks that she is true to him, but then when she meets another man in her house, she falls in love with him. She forgets her old dead husband. That's why it's a comedy, a joke in one act. That is how that subtitle of the play we have in the case of The Bear. Next, we have Riders to the Sea, where we have an old lady with six children, 6 boys and 2 girls. So 8 children totally. And her husband also died early. You find that one after another, husband, eldest son, then next son, like that. All the 6 sons die. Without a male support in the family, how will an old woman live her life in an island? And that's a big question for us. We see such families in our own midst. That's why the story is called, actually, it's a one act play that's called Riders to the Sea. The riders, those who ride to the sea to sell some objects or to fish and all that, they don't come back. The sea swallows, the sea destroys all men except women. Next, we have Aravind Adiga. It's a novel that is the White Tiger. How do the poor people and the rich people interact? How the rich people exploit the poor, or how the poor people deceive, cheat the masters, and how they interact with each other, and how they survive in so many political, social complexities. That's a whole story of this novel, The White Tiger. I see that we are spending too much time on human relationships and all that. We have two more topics. One is reflections on life. Another is takeaways. These two will take more time. And also I have another topic, that is analyzing a poem. I have to check. Maniba, do we have some students? Hello, Maniba.
So,
Do we
I'm
have
here.
some? Do we have some students?
Yes, sir. We have in YouTube. Please make the screen big, sir. It's going well,
Yeah,
sir.
this is okay. Uh, is it okay?
No, sir.
Are you able to see or not?
Yes, sir. The screen is viewable. No problem in that.
Do the students have some questions?
No, sir. Not still. It's very clear, sir.
Can we ask the students to come with their questions if they have any
Absolutely fine,
questions
sir.
up to now? Actually, I need 1 more hour. Actually, I have a few slides, but they will take more time for us.
Okay, 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 sir.
That's why I want to interact with the students.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, let's have the students ask questions so that we can address them in the next 5 to 10 minutes.
Definitely, sir.
Yeah, let me.
Dear students, thank you for joining this live session by our sir. If you have any questions, you can post in chat box. And those who are watching in YouTube also, please have a live chat so that your questions will be addressed.
I will need another 30 to 40 minutes to address all other topics.
Really wonderful, sir. 12 weeks lectures in 1 hour. Nice, sir.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Learners, participants, can we listen to you?
As the content is very clear, they wish us to continue, sir. Please continue.
At least they should say that. I don't see any kind of message on the chat box or any voice I'm not able to hear.
Here in YouTube only they have connected, sir.
Okay. Okay. That means they can't speak. Is that so?
Yes, sir. If at all they pose any questions, I will be letting you know.
Okay. In that
Please
case, I will
continue.
try to continue and complete this. That means we may have to go a little longer. Okay.
Yes, yes, sir. Please proceed.
Then let me go full screen. Yeah. Now we come to the second most important aspect of our course, reflections on life. Again, I have brought all these writers together and we have some questions. I have omitted the short stories because I know it will be difficult to cover all the text in 1 hour. It will be very difficult. When we read the text of Abdul Kalam, we have to think about one question like, what is the role of an academic teacher and a spiritual guide? What does a teacher do in the classroom? How does a teacher shape the life of the student? And similarly, when the student doesn't have a way to live, when a student like Abdul Kalam, after failing an interview, when he doesn't know what to do, how does a spiritual guide or teacher guide the individual? So this is a question for reflection in this text. Next, we have Chetan Bhagat, who answers the question, why mustn't we commit suicide at all? We should not commit suicide at all. We should not think about it because there is no power of button in our body or in our mind as a mobile phone may have a power off button. You can simply switch it off. But for human beings, we don't have anything like that. Then why should we go and find something extraneous, something outside ourselves, like a poison or so rope or anything like that? Then when we come to Amish, we have one big question: how do we fulfill our duties and yet follow our dreams? Amish became a financial analyst, and he was earning a lot of money, but he always wanted to be a writer, become a writer. He earned a lot of money, but he was working in a company which demanded all his time, so he could not find time to write his novel. Writing the novel also was a compulsion from his own mind. He wanted to write it. So when he had this problem, he saved some time from travel and uses the time to write his novel. Um, Hello? So, okay. முடிச்சிருமா போ? முடிச்சிருமா போ? Okay, okay. We will just look at this slide and complete it now. We will come back another day. The learners who are listening to us, if they can give us some comments, questions, and observations, they will be very useful to us to help the students. Just this one we will complete, and then we will stop here. We will resume this live interaction in another class sometime later, before your end semester examination, probably with a more focus on the descriptive passage, descriptive answer in the end semester examination. When we think about John Didion, we find we have a huge question: how do we know the story that has chosen us? Remember, yeah, we may think that we are chosen by some people or something, but then Didion tells us there is a story which chooses all of us, and we tell that story in our life. Whether we are writers or not, every one of us has a story to tell. Virginia Woolf asks this huge question again: can anyone fight against death successfully? We are presented the fight of the moth against death in that prose piece, The Death of the Moth. Finally, it dies. Wordsworth presents us with another question: how do we understand the biorhythm of our life? There is a rhythm in our life. How do we understand it? We may have to meet an old man like what Wordsworth did to understand his biorhythm, by which he can renew his own life. He can renew hope and continue with his life. Next, we have Longfellow. This is again a very important question for us. How can we leave something memorable and useful to humanity? That is the crux of it. We are born in this world. We receive something from nature. We receive something from our family, friends, and the society. What can we give back to the society which will stay after our death? Remember, every one of us, we want to be remembered in our life and also after our life. What can we do so that people in future will remember us? So we must do something which will be remembered by humanity. So we have to leave some footprints, do something useful to the whole world. Davis asks us this question: if we have worries all the time, how do we live our life? If we pursue something, how do we live our life? Lastly, we have Robert Frost: how do we live with our neighbors? That's a big problem. How do we live with our neighbors? We cannot live alone in this world. We have to live with our neighbors. We have to accept their viewpoint. We have to understand their viewpoint. We have to help ourselves. With this, let me stop here. I will just simply show you the questions that I have for all the other topics or all the other ideas. Here we come to this analyzing a poem, and we have a sample poem here. I will do all this in another class for you. In the meanwhile, please send your questions to us, comments to us, so we can help you the best way possible. Thank you very much. See you. Bye. Is that okay,
Thank you,
Maniba?
sir.
Yes,
Yes, sir.
Maniba.
It's wonderful. And our learners will be definitely benefited by your lecture. and they will be eagerly waiting for part 2 of this, sir. And one of the
Okay.
learners, yes, sir. And one of the learners in YouTube has expressed her sincere thanks and happiness for being your student. And she has requested for the hall ticket. So she is Darshini. Ms. Darshini, the hall ticket will be sent before a week, which you have to download from the learning page itself.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That's all.
Bye.